What is up? Thank you so much for joining me live here. We are finally, once again, doing a live stream. If you happen to be watching this on replay, however, stick around. I'm going to get right into a topic of conversation that I have that I've been wanting to talk about. We'll let you know we're going to be talking about the draft. And not too much on this upcoming draft that's coming up here for this season, but we're going to take a look back at how basically Derek Falvey and Thad Levine have been drafting to this point under their regime, kind of who have been the guys they've drafted, who are some of the successes, who are some of the guys maybe they missed on, and, you know, kind of just get us up to date as we head into this 2022 draft. But for anybody who is here live, I'll get the live chat up on the screen here live in just a minute. Again, I'm going to kind of jump into this conversation, but I will be jumping back into the live chat and kind of going and looking for what you're putting down in there. And, happy to answer any questions you might have. But again, thank you so much for checking this out either way, whether you're live or on replay. Been a very long time, too long since we did one of these. I don't think I got live in June at all. So that's a bummer, but tonight it was kind of a perfect opportunity for it. The Twins are off. Still planning on doing a system recap on the minor league action tonight, but no Twins game. So it always kind of felt weird for me to do these on an evening where the Twins were playing, and I know most of the audience is going to be watching. Reese says, "Oh boy, draft history. This might get a little ugly." I'll be nice though. I'll be nice, but we'll take. And it's not that much of a history if you think about it, because it takes guys so long to make it to the major leagues for the most part. We're just now seeing some of the guys in the last Terry Ryan era draft making it up. Anyway, again, a nice night for a live stream. This works out really well. Happy to be here and happy that you're joining me. Should just kind of parlay right before we get into our topic. Thank you so much for all your support. It's been really fun. I love doing this. I love all the stuff that I do in the channel here and keeping up with the Twins and trying to help people find easier ways to keep up with the Twins and the minor leagues. It's definitely feeling like the dog days of summer, though. We reached that in early July, and I'm feeling it a bit. So kind of trying to mix things up as well. You might have noticed things not being quite as uniform on the system recaps, and then, trying some different things. We talked a lot about the trade deadline. So, if you're kind of interested, if that's the hot topic you feel like getting some discussion on, I won't feel bad if you dip out and catch us back later. If you want to go check that out, I talked about some of my thoughts on the Twins trade chips and the guys who I think the teams will be calling on, and guys that I think a lot of people are hesitant to trade, who I'm not as much, and some thoughts on the overall starting pitching in the organization right now. And then I also did a video on trade targets, which was mostly around the bullpen. But it was kind of funny, like the very next day, we're sitting here, there was 3 starting pitchers that I mentioned in the trade targets one. And 2 of them are basically hurt now. Frankie Montas is going to be skipped to start. So, I don't think he's on the IL yet, but Tyler Mahle is on the IL. So that leaves only Luis Castillo among the guys that I talked about. But it's funny, the trade deadline is August 2nd. So it's a ways away yet. And there's still so many, questions to be answered about some of these teams of who's going to be a seller, who's going to be a buyer. So, this is still pretty premature to be talking about this stuff. All right. Let me bring this on here. So now we'll see the live chat as it comes up on the screen. But I'll pop some of these in as well. Yeah, Reese brings up, I alluded to that. Kudos to Terry for that 2016 draft, though. Maybe we'll start there, actually. Yeah, let's do that. Now, what I have pulled up here is Baseball Reference. I have this prepared. And I wasn't planning on going backwards, but now that we're on the topic, we might as well. That draft is looking really good. This was the last draft pre-Falvey and Levine era. And as you can see, Kirilloff was the first pick. And this was such a high school heavy draft to go Kirilloff, Rortfit, Miranda, Badu, all high schoolers right out of the gate. And then Jax, who's obviously, one of the only good contributors in the Twins bullpen at the moment. Jordan Balazovic was in this draft class, so we may see it from him. Tyler Wells, who is, much like Badu, a guy who was taken in the Rule 5 draft and has since established himself as a major leaguer. Sean Poppin, a little more quietly, I feel like. I think he was DFA'd and claimed by other teams. I think he's with the Diamondbacks now, but he's pitched a bunch in the major leagues. So a lot of guys from this draft class emerging, and again, Jose Miranda, a guy who just has emerged this season at the major league level. So that really gives you, a sense of how long, especially these high school, young high school guys can take to reach the major leagues. But again, we're going to be kind of focusing on what Falvey and Levine have been up to. Again, thanks so much, everybody, for coming in live. I've been really feeling the love, especially this season. I mean, I've had really good, steady growth throughout the whole time on my channel, but I've been kind of able to invest some more time, basically the second half of last year and this year, and I really have just seen a lot of good response back, and it's just very cool. The more I kind of put in, the more support there is. So I really appreciate that. Boom. Oh, yeah, and that's a good point. That's always a consideration. The Twins have a ton of good players to add to the 40-man before the Rule 5 draft. It's so weird that was something that had to be accounted for this year and then didn't happen. Just think like, speaking of this draft class, again, we're going to kind of stop it, but get off topic. Blaine Enlow, if the Twins knew there wasn't going to be a Rule 5 draft, there's no way he would ever been added to the 40-man roster. Like a weird wrinkle of the lockout season. Of course, everything should be as usual this upcoming year, you would think, but who knows? Bob mentions the first round target. We're going to get to, I'll get to that, and we will talk about this draft in just a minute. But I want to do this kind of recap of the Falvey Levine era first. All right. Yeah, Steven, talking about, again, a mention of that video, the potential trade targets I talked about, and David Bednar of Pittsburgh. I think he's the top guy. You combined the way he's pitched the last 2 years with his very long team control. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but I believe he has 4 more seasons of team control. But I think it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot to get him. I think everybody's kind of looking at him and licking their chops and envisioning getting him away from Pittsburgh and into their bullpens. I think he'll be the number 1 bullpen guy on the list for a lot of teams. And the tough thing is Pittsburgh doesn't really have, they could just keep him. So you're really going to have to motivate them to move it. Bob, who's a big college baseball fan as well, mentions Cade Povich, who was a star at Nebraska, pitched against the number 1 team in the regionals and was dynamite. He's been great. Cade Povich has been wonderful for the Twins, their 3rd round pick from last year. He's already in Cedar Rapids, started the year in Cedar Rapids. Oh, and actually we mentioned that last night. Josiah, why'd you say it was an aggressive assignment for Cade to be in high A? Well, think of it this way. Steve Hadger, who was another college draft pick, right? He was drafted out of Michigan last year. He's been in Fort Myers this whole time. So Cade Povich was drafted after Steve Hadger. Both of them were drafted out of college. And Povich has been at a higher level this entire time this season for him to be there. I'm not sure what the averages are on I'm like at this point in the year, it wouldn't be that unusual to see the college guys being in high A. But I did think kind of to start him out in his first full season as a pitcher in high A was, not crazy aggressive, but it was a little bit on the aggressive side. And I guess that off the top of my head, that Hadger example is the best one that I've got for you at the moment. Yeah, and Steven adds some more on Bednar. Yeah, it's very impressive pitcher and a lot of team control. So he's going to be a nice target. All right. Again, feel free to talk amongst yourselves. That's one of the fun things about these live streams too, is it's very community driven. You guys can get on side conversations. I won't be offended, but I'm going to jump in and dive deep into our topic of discussion, which is just doing a real quick overview of the Falvey Levine era drafts, which started in 2017. What a way for them to get into the organization with the number 1 overall pick, right? And, if we're looking at this draft class, it's pretty easy to feel underwhelmed at this point, especially since Royce Lewis is hurt again. And I think it's maybe fair to say that, like, even if Royce Lewis becomes a superstar like he was looking like before getting injured again, this is still the number one overall pick we're talking about here. Not that every number one overall pick is a slam dunk. There's a lot of guys who go number one and don't do much. But, I don't think we'd give him any extra credit if the number one overall pick happens to develop into a superstar. You kind of hope that that's the way that it works out. Brent Rooker was a guy that just kind of never, he kind of is what he is and never got any better on the parts that he was, deficient in, I guess I would put it. Basically, the strikeouts remained very high. And of course, now he's in San Diego. He went there with the Taylor Rogers trade. Landon Leach, basically his arm exploded. A big time Canadian starting pitching prospect, a big guy as well, especially even when his high school years. And then Blaine Enlow, which this was kind of maybe the one big takeaway in terms of like general overall draft strategy that I want to point out about this draft. You might, if you're not super familiar with the MLB draft, they do have bonus pools that are tied to basically each draft slot, but you don't have to sign. It's not like that guy signs to the bonus slot. You can go over bonus, you can go under bonus, but you can't go over your pool or penalized basically. So, teams don't like to do that. So it's kind of interesting to point out that in this first had, essentially they drafted Royce Lewis and signed him for under slot. And then it's kind of funny that it happened that their fourth pick, their third round pick, but the fourth guy they drafted, Blaine Enlow, actually was the guy who got the second most money in this draft class because he was committed to LSU. So they had to sort of give him enough money to not go to college and try to, improve his draft stock, move up the board. So you might see that I mentioned that specifically because I wouldn't be shocked if we see something similar to this happen this year. We'll talk about that again. We pivot into talking about this year's draft class. But that is sort of the top of this draft class. Charlie Barnes, of course, we're familiar with from him pitching last year, no longer in the system. Bechtold has since kind of converted to catching. So that's been interesting, but he's still in Double-A. De La Torre didn't make it hardly anywhere. A lot of these guys, Brian Sammons is still around, but a lot of these guys, as is the case with the baseball draft, haven't really gotten far or kind of fizzled out. So that was 2017, again, their first year at the helm. And that's another good example. Again, this is ways back, and we still can't even really completely grade some of these because, again, Royce Lewis hasn't really emerged yet. 2018, they see they're picking much later. They had the 20th and 59th picks were their first two picks, and they went a couple college guys and Trevor Larnach and Ryan Jeffers, college bats. Jeffers was like considered this crazy reach at the time. And I don't think he'd caught a ton. He certainly caught a lot in college, but he hadn't been, a guy who was super familiar with catching like some other guys. And then, with the COVID shortened season, he did not play that much in the minor leagues. That's always kind of something I come back to with Ryan Jeffers. Is the guy developmentally, I think still has a ways to go. You think, well, he's 25. You think, well, how much better is he going to get? But again, I want to pull up. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. He only played he had 800 plate appearances in the minor leagues. A lot of guys get like 2,000 before, and maybe we're talking about high school guys, the international guys, a little bit apples to oranges, but not a guy who played a lot of the minors. And, probably same can be said about Larnach, I'm sure. But that was the top of their draft. Deshaun Kersey is still in the system. He's in Double-A. Hasn't really developed like they'd hoped. I think Cole Sands is really, even though he's struggled at the major league level, got knocked around a bit. I think for a fifth-round draft pick, and especially the way he's came up through the system, that was a really nice pick for them. Charles Mack, I think he maybe has developed into a bigger guy than they'd expected. Again, drafted as a shortstop, which you see a lot from high school guys. And he's moved off that position. He's still around. Josh Winder, obviously, this was, the kind of pick that Derek Falvey and Thad Levine, well, Derek Falvey maybe and more in particular, these are the kind of, and I missed him from last draft, but Bailey Ober going in the 12th round back in 2017 and Josh Winder in the 7th round in 2018. Those are the picks. Those are the picks that, Derek Falvey made a name for himself in that Cleveland org and how good they were at uncovering guys like this in late rounds or guys that they would pluck out of other systems. And Josh Weiner went to Virginia Military Institute, and he didn't really throw super hard. And they got him up, and he just seemed to just instantly be throwing 97 shortly after being drafted. It was crazy. So again, some successes, some failures. Again, a lot of these guys are still in the system. Well, some of them aren't. But as you see, there really hasn't been not a lot of, just scrolling through, not a lot of these names really jump out as guys who've emerged as big-time prospects or anything. But Trevor Larnach, who is, I consider kind of a safe pick at 20. I think that's what you do, though, when you're picking later in the first round. And you have a guy who is established college bat. I think that was a really good draft pick, and he's really panning out so far. Got to stay healthy, but a nice piece. 2019. And again, so often even your first round draft picks just are complete busts, which unintentional segue warning. And again, feel free to chat in the chat, I'll jump back and scroll through. But again, I think I like to keep these pretty tight for the replay viewers. I know a lot of people can't join live, so I like to keep these moving. We are to 2019, and with the 13th overall pick, the Twins took a pretty big gamble on an extremely raw prospect in Keone Cavaco. I think, losing the 2020 season really was something they could not afford to have happen with a guy like this. Not that that's a permanent excuse. It's not like he wasn't and working out and developing physically over that time. But, at a certain point, he's got to start playing better. I think I saw you hit a home run tonight, I think. So it's not like he's been all terrible, but he's certainly not shown as much as you would hope for a 13th overall pick. And now he's been moved off shortstop. He's playing third base. Some of that is because Noah Miller's in the system now, but I think, him sticking at third at shortstop, was maybe kind of a pie in the sky thing anyway. So, Cavaco, we'll see. Again, I still think he's young enough to where, I don't feel good calling him a bust completely at this point, but I also think it seems very unlikely he's going to live up to, the hype, the billing, whatever you want to call it, of a 13th overall pick. Matt Wallner, though, of course, he was still that kind of compensation round or whatever, the sandwich, whatever they call it, still technically a first round pick, but 39th overall. And obviously, guy with Minnesota ties, he's been just incredible. He's going to the Futures game. Spencer Steer, who was the third round pick here, Futures game as well. That was announced today. That's kind of the prospect version of the All-Star game during the All-Star festivities. So excited to those guys. Congratulations to those dudes. Matt Cantorino has just been an incredible performer when he's been healthy. I saw somebody called him out in the chat. He is injured. I think he's throwing in Fort Myers, so that's good news. But he hasn't appeared in any kind of a rehab game yet. And of course, the Twins are going to be careful with him because he has a kind of a long history of injuries at this point now. Missed last season. But if we're thinking about like upside of these three guys, man, this draft class, and especially if Cavaco can develop into something, again, like I said, it's really hard for me to envision him living up to the 13th round pick, but it's kind of like Nick Gordon. And Nick Gordon's probably never going to live up to being the number 4 overall pick or whatever he was. But he's looking like a damn good major leaguer right now. And, it took him a while to get things going. And he always kind of had some starts and stops along the way, and had some years where he didn't look so good. So, I'm not giving up on Cavaco yet, but it's not looking great. Wallner, Cantorino, and Steer, though, those are looking like some really nice picks. And again, that sandwich round and then the second and third round. We'll see how those guys go. Seth Gray is still in Rapids. He's still playing some third, but mostly, I think he's kind of split third and first. But he's producing, not really pushing too far. Same with Will Holland, who's, he's been a key guy for Cedar Rapids. Both these guys have been key for Cedar Rapids, but not really hitting the prospect status or anything. Gibson Long was pitching excellent in Cedar Rapids, but has been kind of getting beat up at AA. We'll see if he can adjust. Anthony Prado, if you're watching the system recaps, you know all about this guy. The beast in Cedar Rapids earlier. Brent Hedrick has looked really good. So there's Sean Moon pitched really well. Cody Lawyerson's looking like he might be something now that he's pitching in the bullpen in Double-A. Louis Varlin in the 15th round out of Concordia St. Paul. That's looking like maybe a steal. Edouard Julien, who went this late in the 18th round because he had some kind of off the field questions, got into some trouble while he was at Auburn. Wasn't planning on signing with the Twins. Kind of speaking of bonuses again, the Twins had to convince him. They had to find, money at him because only like 5 guys in this draft class got more money than Julien, who was their 18th round pick. So that's kind of an interesting story. And he's looking like something very interesting himself. Now they moved him all around the field last year. Now he's back to kind of playing more second base primarily. Even Alex Isola in the 29th round, I think, is a guy who, certainly for a 869th overall pick is intriguing. I had him in my top 30 in the Twin system on my last list. I think kind of, the Twin system right now, especially with all these graduates, is a bit down. But this is like a really deep class. Again, kind of having Cavaco not living up to the billing hurts this one quite a bit, but I think they did quite nicely in the later rounds in particular. Of course, not everybody was going to be a hit, and some of these guys might develop later on, but overall, that's looking like a nice overall draft class for them. And then 2020, this was just so weird. The, COVID draft, only a 5-round draft. I can't imagine what trying to like prepare and scout for this was like. It's already just the baseball draft already feels like such a crapshoot, and so difficult as it is that, there's so many little pitfalls and things where you can go wrong. So it was interesting what they tried to do. Aaron Sabato at 27 overall, never the profile of player I don't think I would almost ever draft personally. And he hasn't, he's hitting better. Like he's completely falling on his face, but you'd expect that, this guy you drafted out of college as a bat first baseman would kind of just destroy the lower minor leagues on his way through. And he just hasn't done that. I think, similar to Cavaco, I think it's too early to call him a complete bust. But I also kind of think doesn't seem very likely to me he's going to live up to a first round pick billing, but we'll see. Eric Solari was a guy, I liked him, but kind of a bat first guy who could play, and he still is this. Kind of in theory, he's a second baseman and a corner outfielder, but like, is he really good anywhere? I don't know. Good enough maybe to fit those spots, but you never feel like he's giving you plus defense. And he got off to just a terrible start this year, but he's been hitting a lot of late. Hit for the cycle earlier for Cedar Rapids this year, and I think it's kind of interesting. Another guy's kind of off to a slow start to his pro career, to cut right down to his numbers aren't good this year. Marco Raya in the 4th round was kind of surprising, and you especially after it seemed like they played it so safe with Sabato out of North Carolina, Solari out of Tennessee. A couple guys that had really produced in college, and they go and get Marco Raya out of high school in the 4th round when I don't have the exact data or anything, but I'm pretty sure that 2020 draft teams really didn't draft a whole lot of high school guys. You can understand why, and a lot of high school guys I think weren't super interested in getting drafted because, I think they felt like they could improve their stock potentially more going to college. But he's looking like a very interesting piece. Pitching really well in Fort Myers. And then Kalai Rosario, an outfielder from Hawaii, another high school guy. He's showing power. He's intriguing. Kind of a lot of swing and miss in his game right now, but he's also very young. But again, just a weird stuff, man. Obviously understand why this draft was altered so much, but kind of makes it weird to look back on. And then last year's draft. So, we talked about even how we go back to 2016 and there's finally guys from that class that are emerging. So to be looking back at last year's draft this closely seems kind of crazy, but we're going to do it anyway. Let's go crazy. And actually, it's been a while since I looked at the bonus stuff. So actually kind of, if you're looking for the guy that they threw a lot of money at late, it was Pat Winkle. the catcher, who is now in Cedar Rapids and playing pretty well. But Chase Petty, the number one pick, I really liked that pick. It's kind of a risky, his profile, high school guys that throw in the upper 90s, hasn't worked out for a lot of teams, but it was the 26th overall pick. So it's like, okay, you could see why, that profile hasn't worked out. That's why the top, 15 or whatever draft picks weren't going to be going Chase Petty. But then when you're sitting there at 26 and a guy like that is there, why not? So yeah, of course he went in the Sonny Gray trade. So he's no longer in the system, but I thought that was really interesting and high upside pick, which I like that too, especially when you're picking later in the draft. Like, why not take a shot on a guy who, has like first overall type talent potentially if everything works out right. And then the funny thing is the next guy, Noah Miller. I didn't really love that pick because I loved the high upsideness of Chase B, and Noah Miller felt like such a high floor guy. But he's good, man. Noah Miller is going to be really good. I don't know that he's going to be like a super duper star, but for a guy his age, as comfortable as I could be, like saying, yeah, he's going to be a major leaguer. You can just tell already. And I think he's going to stick at shortstop, which seems like a crazy thing to say about Young too. But I really have been impressed post-draft. And that's maybe a good segue to say I will be providing coverage on the draft and my opinions and all that things. But, they're just my opinions. I'm not like some kind of a draft guru or really, know a ton about the amateur side. I did have a lot of fun watching some more college baseball this year, and I'm kind of trying to ramp that up every year. But it gets tough once the major leagues get going. It gets tough to handle all that. Steve Hadger was their second round pick, and he was looking really good. He's on the injured list in Fort Myers with a shoulder injury, soreness, impingement, whatever the lingo of the days for that they're using these days. And then Cade Povich, who we talked about earlier in the third round. I think that was another guy who I talked about not really loving him because he was not a very hard thrower for the most part in college. I think the reports were he was pretty inconsistent in his starts. And then I don't know if it was that he went to the draft combine and didn't throw hard, or if there was reports that there's some kind of a big scouting showcase that he had where he didn't. So I was just like, well, he's a great pitcher, good pitchability, but the velo's down. What are we looking at here? And then much like Josh Winder, it seems like he was another guy, and we'll talk about another guy from this draft class who seemed to just add a bunch of velo like instantly in Cade Povich. And then in the fourth round, we got Encarnacion Strand, who's another guy we've been talking about a ton in the system recaps because it seemed like every night he does something huge, and he was on the IL for very briefly, but he's back with Cedar Rapids. I think he won the Midwest League Hitter of the Month for June, the second time he's won that award this year. So again, these guys are really performing. It's kind of similar to the last draft we talked about, or the last draft in 2019, where Cavaco, kind of not being as good as you'd hoped. Well, with this draft, we have Petty, who's just not completely gone. He's completely gone. But you have the rest of this draft class kind of stepping up and looking very interesting. Travis Adams is a guy pitching really well in Fort Myers. Had some catchers back-to-back here in Cardenas and Winkle. I'm intrigued by both guys. Brandon Birdsell, who they did not get to sign in the 11th round out of Texas Tech, was a beast this season for them. So that was a great that they took in that, hey, let's draft this guy. And it was outside your bonus pool only applies to the first 10 rounds. So they could throw a bunch of money at him if they wanted to. There might be some caps on that. Again, I'm not like a super draft guru. And I know some stuff, but I'm not totally sure on everything. But I know that the draft, the bonus pools are primarily tied to the first 10 picks. And then in the 11th round, they go Birdsell, who I think had been injured. So I love that strategy of maybe there's only a 30% chance that we can sign this guy, but if we do, we're getting like a second, third round pick type potentially pitcher. So that was interesting. Kyler Fedko has been playing well. David Festa is probably the Twins minor league pitcher of the year. In the 13th round. Again, another guy that I didn't know much about Festa when they drafted him. And he's throwing 96, 97 early in his starts right now. And then some other guys that have been performing well: Pearson Ole, Mikey Perez, Dylan Noisy. I think he was pretty recently promoted up to Cedar Rapids. Mike Paredes has pitched well. Jalen Nolan's pitched well. So these guys are all performing pretty well. Some of them are maybe kind of beating up on younger competition. I could see that, but this is kind of similar to 2019, looking like maybe it could be a deeper class. And there'll be some attrition. Some of these guys will, hit a wall as they're going up the ladder. They'll get to a level where they're just not as good as the guys they're facing. Some of these guys are going to have injury problems that are going to kind of halt them. But deep classes, I feel like, in 2021 and 2019. All right. All right, let me flip that over, and then we'll kind of segue into the more little loose, free-flowing topic. So that's basically my excuse to say that I'm going to take a minute to read. It's going to take me a minute to read through some of the comments. But hang on. Thanks again for everybody for hanging out live, and we'll chat a bit longer here. Yeah, we don't need to stay on topic either. Ansley asked, realistically, we only trade for like 2 relievers, right? I think that's probably right. Yeah, seeing a lot of hyperbole that the Twins need 4 relievers. I mean, that would be nice, but you got to make room for 4 relievers. Not that that's that hard, but 40-man roster spots are a thing. 26-man roster spots are a thing. Getting 4 trades lined up might be difficult, just in general. I think that I would agree that that's probably not happening. I still like the idea, and I know with the recent happenings with Montas and Male being hurt. Again, I kind of mentioned this on that trade targets. I don't think the Twins really need any more starting pitching depth. I think they've got great starting pitching depth, but if they could add another 2, another guy that you'd feel really good about starting in a playoff game, like a Luis Castillo, someone in that mold. Number one, it really improves the rotation in a short series, which they are. Because I don't know who's the Twins, who's the third guy that you feel good about. The Twins are not going to get a bye in this new format. The Yankees and the Astros are just so good, and they're both beating up on their divisions. Those are going to be the top 2 teams coming out of the AL. They're both going to get a bye basically in the first round. Everybody else is going to play a 3-game series in the first round. So the Twins are more than likely going to be playing a 3-game series. So obviously, you'd think Sonny Gray, Joe Ryan, he's been a bit inconsistent, but I still feel like, you feel pretty good with him starting. Depending on who he's matching up against, you might not feel great about the matchup. But I think you got to feel pretty good about him. And then who's the number 3 guy right now? Even though the Twins have 6 or 7 starters, if everybody's healthy, there's not really, even Joe Ryan, you're like, we love Joe Ryan. But the other thing, the point that I was getting to was the other thing, that if you were to bring in a starting pitcher to add to the top of the rotation, now all of a sudden you feel better about not having to keep Josh Winder as starting pitching depth, and you can put him in the bullpen. And, I would be very intrigued at Josh Winder as a 1-2 inning relief pitcher. I think he could be as good as anybody in the bullpen outside of Duran and Jax, and maybe even better than Jax. He's got great stuff and good command. Winder doesn't walk a lot of guys. So that's there's a domino effect. I know the bullpen is the number one problem that needs to be addressed, clearly. But if you add to the rotation, that could be kind of a domino effect. Devin Smeltzer is another guy who maybe you could move him into a long relief role if you added to the rotation as well. So that's kind of my thinking there. If people were weirded out that's where that video started. But it's you can improve the bullpen by improving the rotation. All right. And some questions on Spencer Steer. Completely natural to be asking about that. A guy who's absolutely raking in AAA. But it's hard. It's hard to answer these questions because he's not a shortstop. He can play there like in an emergency. Maybe you could think of him sort of along the lines of like a Nick Gordon at shortstop. Like, yeah, if somebody's got a day off, you can plug him in there. But if you have like a month of a stretch where you need a shortstop for, like, he's not going to be your logical candidate to be replacing Carlos Correa at shortstop. You're not going to have a plan A of having Steer as your shortstop. But he is a good third baseman. He's a good second baseman. Those are his primary positions. Who do we got there? I mean, you've got Gio Urshela is at third base, and he's got another year of control. He's going to be back next year. Jose Miranda's primary position is third base. Luis Arias can play third base. At second base, you of course have Jorge Polanco, who's going to be around. You've got Arias there as well. You've got Nick Gordon factoring in. So I mean, right now, I don't know. I wouldn't project that Steer gets called up this season. And even next year, like it gets tricky. Obviously Arias is playing a lot of first base right now, and that creates opportunity potentially there. But there's not obvious room. And he's not a guy that they have started to like mix in the outfield or anything like that. I guess one thing to take into account is not having a set DH creates some flexibility. So maybe there is something there that I'm not considering, but they are using that a ton for Buxton. Yeah, and that's kind of the logic behind also why I think Steer is just a really nice trade chip. And that's, again, nothing against Spencer Steer. That teams will be asking about him is obviously complimentary. So, yeah, I just and Wallner, you could say a lot of those same things about Matt Wallner too, who's been insane. Especially he started out so slow. These are tricky questions. Where would I rank our farm system? Because I don't follow all the other 29 teams' farm systems. So I can't, that's really hard for me to judge. But especially since my previous, entering the year, number one prospect, Jose Miranda, I put Lewis ahead of him once it was so clear that he was back to what we could think him to be. Miranda's graduated now, so he's not a prospect. Royce Lewis is hurt. Austin Martin is not looking like a tippy top type prospect. And although there are all these guys that have kind of popped up, like in your Steers and your Wallners and some of the guys from the 2021 draft, I'm guessing this is definitely a top half farm system right now. Definitely after 15. But a lot of that is a product of how many guys have graduated recently. A lot of these guys in these drafts we mentioned, your Larnix, your Jeffers, Kirilloff, Miranda now. So many guys have. Winder graduated, Duran graduated. Like they've had a ton of guys internally come up through the system who have now graduated from prospect status. And I think that's maybe. Well, it's a combination. If we're being honest, it's a combination of that and that your most recent first-round picks, Chase Petty's gone, so that's going to hurt a lot. Aaron Sabato's not looking like you would, hope your first round draft pick would look. And Keone Cavaco is also not looking like you would hope your first-round draft pick would look. So, they might be bottom 10. If I was just like to guess where someone who does follow all of the systems would put them. All right, there we go. Bob talking about this year's draft again. That reminds me. Thank you. I want to talk about Twins Daily's draft coverage and this mock draft and kind of this year's draft a bit. Again, I'm not going to talk about this in kind of some tone that I'm an expert or anything. But I'll share you some of my thoughts and just shout out to Jeremy Nygaard and Jamie Cameron, who are both providing a ton of draft coverage at Twins Daily. Jeremy has been doing this for many years. So he is an expert and he does follow amateur baseball very closely. He has sources as well. So Jeremy is I think, as good of a source as you can have. Put this mock draft out on June 3rd. I will also say, in addition to the MLB draft being very hard to, navigate for teams, we can look back and there's so many mistakes that are made. It's incredibly difficult to try to project or, have mock drafts that are accurate. But one of the things that I think seems fairly concrete is that it seems like there is a very concrete sort of top 8, and they're all position players. So, that is not music to my ears, unfortunately. I would like to see the Twins really steer into drafting. And I saw Andrew, this was so funny. I'm glad, Andrew, you brought this up. Last year, the Angels literally took a pitcher in every single pick they had, which I think is just hilarious. And that's like what I wouldn't mind if the Twins did that. Yeah, and it would be hilarious. But I would be like, you know what? Hey, no team's ever had too much pitching, so why not? But, it does seem like maybe it would be a little bit silly to kind of reach when there's this obvious tier, it seems like, of 8 hitters. Jeremy's mock draft had actually Elijah Green going to the Twins. So I remember long ago, I think coming into this season, was like, I think the presumed number 1 overall coming into this year. So that would be crazy. But I know I've heard a ton about Connor Prelip. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right. Again, just showing my draft expertise. But he's a guy who had Tommy John and didn't pitch in college last year, kind of protecting his draft stock. So he's kind of like, what's behind door number 2? If you like some mystery and some intrigue and, a potential high upside uncovering, and then, maybe you maybe reach for him and save a few bucks that you can spend later. I don't know what he's expecting for a signing bonus or anything, but there's some intrigue there. So the Twins being at the end of that 8 with those seemingly clearly obvious 8 top bats, it's kind of maybe they're a wild card in this draft, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. But the draft is on Sunday, July 17th. So that's coming up here through Tuesday, July 19th. Right around the corner, they moved it to the All-Star break. So I'm kind of interested to see how that is, if they have any kind of different coverage on the draft this year, and how, kind of the hype and how it's covered. Because it hasn't really, it's been getting so much better in recent years, but it hasn't really been super covered outside of like MLB Network. And even then, it's a little light on the coverage, but getting better each year. But the Twins have the 8th overall pick, the 48th overall pick, the 68th overall pick, which is their comp round B pick. And then they do not have their 3rd round pick because they signed Carlos Correa. They had to give that up because of that Correa signing. And then they draft not all the way until the 114th pick. So it'll be interesting to see what they do strategy-wise there. I'm with you. Personally, I'm with you, Andrew. Just take anybody who's a pitcher. You know how, like, when the Twins claim somebody or call somebody up and people ask, like, well, does he pitch? That's what I would do in the draft room. If I was in the Twins draft room and somebody threw a name out, I'd be like, well, does he pitch? I'd be that guy. All right. Again, kind of catching up. Yeah, and thanks again. I see some answers being some questions being answered by the chat. Thanks everybody for hanging out. Again, hopefully, beyond just listening to me blab about the Twins, these are fun because you guys get to kind of bounce ideas around off each other and chat, learn some stuff and throw some opinions out. Was I surprised Cantorino didn't start the year in AAA? No. People think about AAA as the next step from the big leagues, which, I mean, it is. But AAA is like I don't know how a nice way to put this, but AAA is mostly like your flamed out major leaguers. It's mostly your guys who are in their late 20s, early 30s. AAA, depending on the organization, depending on the group of guys, depending on the coaching staff, AAA is sometimes a atmosphere that teams protect their prospects against, because there's a lot of jadedness in AAA. Nobody wants to be in AAA. Basically, nobody wants to be in AAA. So it's never that surprising when like a prospect is in AA or stays in AA longer. I mean, if you look at kind of a lot of the Twins prospects that they've had, most of them didn't spend a lot of time in AAA before they made it to the majors. Maybe they had to go back down and then come back again. But I don't think there's like a certain set amount of time that you want to have a guy in AAA before you call him up. There's probably more talent. I mean, obviously, there's probably more raw talent in AA than there is in AAA. AAA has more skill, is how I would put it. These guys are maybe more rounded out. You might have, they're more professional. Guys just have kind of learned some lessons along the way. Maybe, well, again, a lot of these guys are former big leaguers. But I think like the raw talent might be even better in AA anyway. So I don't think the competition level is all that much different. Now I don't know how much longer Cantor. I mean, I would fast track Cantorino as a bullpen piece. That's kind of it's similar to the Duran situation to me at this point. Could there be a really impressive top of the rotation type starting pitcher there? Yes, I think there could be. What are the odds you're actually going to get there? And how much more time are you going to have to spend getting him healthy again, getting his innings back up? Oh, well, he increased from this inning count this year to this year. Well, we can only really expect him to pitch this many innings next year. These are the kind of conversations that were happening with Brusdar Graterol, too, back when he was on the come up. And at a certain point, which was probably next year, that Cantorino is going to have to be added to the 40-man roster. And that stuff goes out the window usually, because it's like, okay, you only have, well, these days, you need every pitcher almost on your 40-man to be pitching in the major league sometimes. How many injuries there are. So I'm not going to say that I don't think that Cantorino can make it as a starting pitcher. Maybe Duran's going to come back someday and start. Maybe they're going to ramp him up again someday. But it just was so clear that it's such an easier path to put Duran in the bullpen. And it was so clear he has such good stuff that he could be an asset there. I think that same conversation can be had with Matt Cantorino. So even though I was not surprised he didn't start in AAA, he's hurt now, but he's ramping back up. I would just say, screw it. We're not going to ramp you back up to be a starter. We're going to ramp you back up in the bullpen. And at that point, put him on the fast track, because he can help the Twins. I think, I think he's the most intriguing, difference-making piece. They have lots of guys that they've tried from the minor leagues. They have some more guys in the minor leagues they could try who might be sort of Band-Aid guys that can help in, the seventh inning. But not guys that would be huge difference makers potentially. That's a lot to put on a rookie. And it's a lot to expect, Duran as a rookie is doing as well as he is. Jax as a first-year bullpen guy is doing. So it'd be kind of crazy to think we're going to catch lightning in a bottle with a third rookie. But I think he is the guy. And unfortunately, you don't want your major league issues to dictate what you do with your prospects. I think that's a really bad way of operating to a lot of degree, but sometimes it is what it is. And I think that's the point that they are with Cantorino. Had some good names thrown out. Here's the thing with Tyler mentions that Max Kepler could be put in a trade. The thing with that, though, is who's acquiring Max Kepler, right? It's going to be a contending team. A contending team isn't going to want to give up guys who are contributing to their major league roster in the middle of a contending season. They're going to want to give you prospects, and there's other guys who are probably better than Max Kepler that they could acquire and just give up prospects for. And I don't think it would make as disappointing as Max Kepler is. And he's not terrible. He's in a slump right now. He's got a good OBP. He has barely any more strikeouts than walks this year. Let's pull up his numbers on. Again, we're hanging out on Baseball Reference today. I use Fangraphs quite a bit too, but sometimes, and I don't really feel strongly either way. It's just how presentable the information is, basically. But again, Max, a 342 on base percentage. That's very solid. 730 OPS. That's a 112 OPS plus, pardon me. 46 strikeouts to 40 walks. It's not like the Twins should be trying to get rid of him. And on the flip side, the only teams that are going to be looking to acquire Max, in my opinion, are teams who are contending. And again, I don't think they're going to be inclined to give you major league pieces for him. Now, maybe I'm wrong, because the wrinkle that's thrown in is this extra wild card. That might be a lot of stuff. I don't know. So maybe there are going to be more challenge trades where major leaguers are being traded for, would be incredibly rare at the trade deadline. We see it in the offseason some, but at the trade deadline, that's very rare. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy here scrolling through all this. But yeah, Max he's under contract next year for $8.5 million, and then has a team option in 2024. He's already in his age 29 season, so it's not like he'd be like a building block for a non-contender right now. So I don't disagree with you that like you could maybe look at Max Kepler as a spare piece, or as a guy who the Twins could, that would make sense that like, hey, if we could flip this guy and there are multiple other corner outfield options and get pitching, which they need much more than another corner outfielder. But I just don't. I think teams are way more likely going to ask you about, you're way more likely going to be able to get a major league helper by trading a Matt Wallner, a guy who is so young, a guy who has, all of the team control in the world, not even on the 40-man roster yet. He's going to be really attractive to, the rebuilding teams, the non-contenders compared to Max Kepler. But again, maybe it'll be different with this extra wild card and so many teams being in contention. I don't think so, but what do I know? Yeah, I don't like Jeffers being the DH. I don't really like Gary being the DH either. There's better things they could be doing with the DH for sure. Oh boy, we haven't. I don't know what to think. Sam, what do you think about Sano? Oh man, we got to start the whole pod. We got to start the whole live stream over on that topic. I would bet that he's going to be back on the Twins. I wouldn't bring him back on the Twins. I would bet he's going to be back. That's all I'll say about that. He's been a guy that's been hurt a lot. He's been a guy that's been kind of slow to get healthy. So maybe, his timeline gets delayed by a setback and it doesn't happen. But I think if he gets healthy, he's going to be back on the Twins. And I don't know what kind of role they're going to put him in or what. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. But yeah, if that Sano question was about trade value, Miguel Sano has negative trade value. You would have to package him with a prospect, and your return would be less than if you were just trading the prospect. I see Evan Sisk was brought up. He's certainly an interesting guy, and that's maybe segueing into that AA, AAA conversation. It's a little bit different with relievers, but Austin Schulfer and Evan Sisk, I think, are the two main prospect guys who aren't in that like late 20s, early 30s, former big leaguers, guys who the Twins have tried, who have been moved up to AAA. So that intrigues me. Again, keeping in mind that the Twins haven't really seemed to love keeping guys in AAA for super long. Now, neither of them are on the 40-man, but again, that's procedural at this point. There's so many extra guys on the Twins 40-man that relievers who they could easily take off. So it would be interesting to see either of them get a shot. It's hard to see them being, again, it would be lightning striking 3 times to expect some rookies to come up and be that good. But I think, potentially you never know. It's really hard to project with bullpen guys, and Sisk, especially as a left-hander, throws weird. And it's not like he's just a junk baller. He throws 94. I'm very intrigued by him, and I know I've highlighted him a few times on the system recaps, not lately, but I do think he's a name to be very aware of. How long until they DFA Pagan? I think it'll be a little bit longer yet. If he pitched in the 5th inning the other day, I think that is kind of the step now. It's ironic that with so many banged up guys, so many injuries, that the guy who we need we need the most to have an IL stint. Pagan needs to go on the IL, and then you can put him on a rehab assignment. He needs a break, and then he needs to go down in the minors. He needs to get some momentum built up again. It's clear he has physical things going on. I think it's clear he has some mental things going on as well. He's never walked this many guys. As the home runs have always been an issue with Emilio Pagan. So I'm not surprised that he's giving up. I'm surprised he's giving up this many home runs. But it doesn't surprise me that he has a bit of a home run issue. But when you're not walking guys, you can be a productive bullpen pitcher. But he's walking. Oh, man, I'm going to pull this up. Switch to Fangraphs because I've got this set up to have custom stats up here that I like. So I don't know if you know this, but if you have a profile at Fangraphs, you can customize basically your dashboard. So any pitcher I bring up, I can have the same stats pulled up. I love it. So I've got Pagan up here, and just to illustrate that point of how, this is a guy we're not as familiar with as Twins fans because this is his first year here. But just to point out, his walks per 9. 1.67 in his great year with Tampa Bay, 3.68, 2.56, 5. Walk percentage, 4.9, 10.3. Okay, that's pretty high. 6.8, 12.6, almost twice as high. So that tells you, there's something not right. And it's not that he has great command, because his in the strike zone command isn't very good, which is why he gives up so many home runs. But the fact that he's walking so many batters is like the super big red flag in that, sure, this is a guy who, back in 2019 was pretty damn good. But we're getting pretty far away from that now, and he hasn't been as good. His stuff looks great, but he has zero command of that stuff. And these walk numbers show that, like, the in the zone command is bad, but he's also not, his control is poor at this point too. At the same time, like, I think is bad. This is how bad the bullpen is. Like, they should have better options. They should be like, oh, okay, we're just going to DFA this guy, and we have these other guys to go to. I get why they're not confident that they have that right now. They can add to the point where they don't need him. I still think there's an avenue to where maybe we see this 2019 guy again. I think it gets more and more difficult to envision that happening. I certainly wouldn't bet on it. And again, I would prefer to get him an IL stint, a minor league rehab, just reset his entire season. Just go to his locker and say, hey, Emilio, your elbow's sore. You're going on the 15-day IL. If anybody asks you, it's barking. And then get him in St. Paul and pitching a little bit and see if there's something, that clicks just with a reset, anything. But it sucks. It sucks. There's no other way to put it. It sucks watching that guy go out every time. And, of course he has a good appearance here or there. That's going to happen, but oh my gosh. Ugh. And Andrew points out he has an option, so he can go down. So they probably wouldn't. DFAing is. I assume that just to mean cutting him essentially. Stephen V. Miranda for Bednar straight up. Who says no? If I'm the Pirates, I'd say no. I would say no to that if I was the Pirates. Bednar, again, he's got so much control. He's been pitching so well. And it's not that I don't think that that's necessarily a fair like talent value, but I would bet everybody could use bullpen. Not everybody needs bullpen like the Twins need bullpen, but everybody could use another bullpen guy. So I think, I would bet that Pittsburgh could get a better deal than Jose Miranda straight up. They're going to have so many people asking about him. What bullpens do you think they will trade for, or do you think they will no trades at all for or do you think they will no trades? Not sure what this question is asking. I do think they will definitely trade for some bullpen arms. I don't know that they're going to be as moving the needle as we all hope. I guess it depends on your thoughts on a guy like David Robertson. He would be a massive addition to this bullpen. I don't think, if you then have him as sort of your end game with Duran, I think that's nice, but I don't know that that's like, holy crap, watch out for the Twins bullpen all of a sudden. I think they'll definitely make trades. I think it might take until the deadline because I'm not sure a lot of the sellers are going to be very motivated to move anybody. There's always something. There's always something, isn't there? I should we should look at according to Fangraphs, Pagan does have an option, but this is reported as the pre-2022 season number of waiving options remaining. But Steven points out there's some debate about that, and often there are like things that come out after the fact. It's like it's not always super public knowledge on how many options a guy has. Like, was it Lewis Thorpe, who we were believing to have been out of options for a really long time, and then all of a sudden he got another one, and like it didn't come up until he was optioned. I think something weird like that happened with him or somebody else. So it's kind of a mystery. But I think I'll just take that conversation as when are they going to get rid of Pagan? I certainly won't debate this. I don't have any actual hatred for Miguel Sano. I'm certainly pretty kind of done with seeing him play for my favorite baseball team. But I mean, look at how Jose Miranda's played of late, and how Miguel Sano's performed over the past few years. Even if you try to be objective and not take a negative viewpoint into looking at Miguel Sano. And Jose Miranda's not perfect or anything. He's got a ways to go. He's still learning. But he's produced better than Miguel Sano for a lot of Miguel Sano's most recent tenure as well. So, and that's not to mention, and they have that there's a lot of DH opportunities that are available. And that's kind of what I'm curious to see if maybe that's the plan with using Sano. And I don't think he's going to be in every day. I don't even want to get down this road because, again, it might not even come to fruition because he might have setbacks. They might decide just to get rid of him. I would be shocked if he gets healthy and they move on. I'm not saying I would do it. That's what I would do. But it would shock me if they did that. Excalibur asks, you don't see a Chapman to the Cubs 2016 trade. I mean, that would be like, that's our dream, right? That they acquire someone of that caliber who's like one of the elite relievers. Oh my God. I doubt, because I was debating between two topics tonight in either reviewing the draft, and I picked that one because that's coming sooner, or reviewing Favre and Levine's recent trade deadline history. Which maybe we'll do that on another live stream. I think that would be maybe more fun on a live stream than a pre-recorded video. But, you would have to say that this feels quite a bit like 2019 in a lot of ways, in that the Twins are, out in front. They're in really comfortable position right now. A lot can change quickly, but they're in pretty comfortable position, it looks like, in the AL Central, which is down this year. Full disclosure, I really liked the Sam Dyson trade at the time that it happened, before we knew he was hurt, before we knew he was a garbage person. So I don't want to downplay that he wasn't a big addition to the bullpen, or looked like it at the time. And then Sergio Romo was kind of like, okay, he's going to be a helpful guy. I maybe I'm trying to avoid being disappointed, but that's sort of the caliber of additions that I would envision the Twins getting this year. And again, this would be San Francisco Dyson, who was pitching really well and had pitched very well for multiple seasons before that trade. But of course, it turned out he was hurt. And then we found out he's a huge jerk. And that was just a really unfortunate situation. But yeah, man, I don't, that's what I'm envisioning. But this front office has been very surprising to me the last, however, since the Buxton extension. What they did this offseason was shocking and impressive in the way that they were able to get so many trades done in such a short amount of time. Maybe they will say, hey, listen, we got Correa. We don't know that we're going to have him next year. We don't know what's going to happen going forward. This is our opportunity. We have a clear issue to address in the bullpen, and maybe they do go nuts. I don't know. It would surprise me, but it logically makes sense to me that they would really shoot for the moon because of, again, the situation where Correa is in-house and you're not going to potentially now, maybe you have next year. I would say don't bank on it. I don't know. That would be fun though. All right. I think that does it. I think we're all caught up. And again, an off night for the Twins. Figured this would be a good opportunity. We've talked for an hour. Nice. Thanks everybody for showing up. Really appreciate hanging out. This was super fun. Sorry I wasn't able to get to these recently. Again, I'm kind of up against it. And this was sort of like an icebreaker for me from everything else that's going on. System recaps are the bread and butter of this channel. I love doing them. Again, I feel like that's kind of a helpful thing that, it's hard to keep up with, just your major league team. You're playing 162 games, playing almost every night, let alone trying to keep up with a minor league system. So, I'm trying to make that easier on people, but I don't know. I don't know if that's how long that's going to go on for. I don't think about that. I try not to think about that. I do them for as long as I like to do them. I'm going to do them for as long as they're fun. Maybe the end of the road will be at some point this year. Maybe not. I don't know. There's certainly other things I could be doing on this channel, I always think. And live streaming is one of them, one of the many things. So this has been really fun. It's been nice to get back on the horse. We did these a lot in the off season. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for hanging out with a bunch of your fellow Twins fans. And I know right now I'm going to shut this down and get working on that system recap. So you're at least getting it for tonight. Thanks again. We'll talk again soon.